From the Homestead Studios in Santa Clarita, California, it's just the Tip-Sters with Melissa Morgan.
If you left DNA, you're already caught.
If you've got a tip for Melissa, the long story you should never have shortened, the scary story you should never have sugarcoated, the story of the costume you wore to the virtual Halloween party last weekend you should never have bought from kinkybooty.com. Anything, tell us about it by calling the Tipster hotline at 832-TIPSTER. That's 832-847-7837, or send an email to jdtipsters@gmail.com. And now here's your host, putting a spotlight on the big clues and not letting them sleep or even have a cigarette until they talk, Melissa Morgan.
More cowbell. Nope, no cigarettes until you come up with the goods.
She's tough but fair.
I'm not even fair. I'm actually not even tough. I'm not even sure what I am.
Well, no, you're pretty tough.
I'm not at all.
You're pretty tough.
No, sir.
Yeah.
Not even one little bit.
You've got, you're not tough like, talk to me or I'll beat you up. But you're tough like, you have stick-to-itiveness.
Oh, okay.
You have that kind of toughness.
Well, that I appreciate. Also, I'd like to know how you had found kinkybooty.com.
Hey.
No, I'm not going to look over there. No, look, I'm not.
Shiny.
No. No.
Actually, I just made it up in my head. I hope it doesn't really exist.
I was going to say, Kinky Boots is a famous movie turned into a play.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Never heard of it.
Kinky Booty. Now, I'm trying to figure out, is it spelled B-O-O-T-I-E or like little short boots, or B-O-O-T-Y like someone's butt?
With the Y.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Kinkybooty.com.
Yeah.
I would think kinkybooty.gov would be where you would hang out more often. But that's just me.
No, that is kind of.
We've gotten into a horrible area.
No, I'm.
You're intrigued?
I'm intrigued.
You're weird,
yeah.
Like nobody's business. You're weird.
What would that be?
I don't want to know, and you don't want to know, no matter what you say.
I can hear the Stars and Stripes Forever playing.
No, you cannot.
Yeah.
Oh man, all I'm picturing is like a bottomless Uncle Sam, just like parading around with like a sousaphone. I want to lay down. No.
Yes.
No.
In fact, I'm going to click on the video called Daddy's Sousaphone right here.
I'm done with this podcast. I'm leaving today. This is my last day.
You started it.
Hey, who said kinkybooty.com?
No.
Okay.
Right.
So speaking of how awful producer Mark is, in the mail today we got his speeding ticket from September.
Why do you have to torture me with
because
this?
It's $238.
Well, and another
$59 for traffic school. So it's $300, which is apparently a break, because the officer wrote Mark a ticket for like 11 miles over as opposed to 30 miles over the limit.
We've already been through this,
we have.
Darling.
I just needed to remind the tipsters who the good person is in this podcast and who the bad person is.
The old hump dog here has in his brain
hump dog
an entire library of Melissa Bad stories that might someday be culled.
All right. You know what? You got me. I'm done now. I'm done harassing you about the cost of your speeding tickets, and I'm moving on.
All right, you go on. I'm going to go back to kinkybooty.gov.
Kinky Booty, I bet you are.
Yeah, right.
.gov, I bet you are. I swear to God, if one day I look up and you walk in the bedroom wearing like a red, white, and blue Stars and Stripes tall hat and nothing else.
Oh, I'll be carrying a sousaphone.
I'm leaving.
Okay.
Is it in front of you, discreetly placed?
Oh, I'll never tell you.
Okay. All right.
I'll never tell you until I spring it on you,
Sure,
so to speak.
Sure. Cool. Yeah, let's not anymore.
Okay.
So I wanted to say thank you to the wonderful tipster who left a review this week, and it's entitled Newbie to You. And I typically don't read the entire review out because I feel like that's sort of creepy and narcissistic, but it's such a beautiful thing this person wrote. They wrote, I accidentally found you on YouTube. I was watching a true crime channel and there was a link to one of your podcasts and a comment. You do a wonderful job of presenting every story with compassion for the victims. Keep up the good work. you're helping so many people you probably don't even know about. Now, that's the part that is so beautiful to me, that this,
That really is nice.
it's beautiful. I don't know that I'm helping anyone, but I am really grateful for the kind people who take time out of their day to write a review and rate us and subscribe and listen to the podcast. It's, I understand we have a lot of time. A lot of us have a lot more time now to, be at home or be sequestered or, maybe even be alone when we want to be or don't want to be. But I always end up finding a lot of things to fill my time, or maybe it's just my brain is constantly running on high gerbil. But the fact that people take the time out of their day to leave a review, to rate, to subscribe, to listen is a priceless gift to me. It's a priceless gift to me. So thank you, kind reviewer. If you would like to leave a review or rate us on Apple Podcasts, we would be grateful in ways we can't even tell you about. If you have a case you would like us to cover, a case you want us to look into, solved or unsolved, please email us at jttipsters@gmail.com. We have our hotline number, 832-847-7837. You can get a hold of us any way that you can find us, and hopefully we'll get your message. If something happens, it's Mercury in retrograde now. So if you try to message us and you don't get through one way, try another way, because we will be here and we want to hear from you. So this week's episode is one of my favorites. I became a diehard David Mittelman fan after being told about the Carla Walker case from Tipster Tammy. And Carla Walker was in Texas. And it was a 46-year-old cold case that was going to be very difficult to solve, even though there were still people alive who were witnesses, including her boyfriend who was with her. And it was just like some sort of like the heavens opened, and it's not that easy, but that's how I'm going to say it. The heavens opened, and Othram Labs in Woodlands, Texas, got together with other labs and tested the DNA that is difficult to test. They kind of pride themselves on the cases that are hard, that are impossible, that other people don't want to tackle. And I'll be damned if they didn't find a match through genetic genealogy of 3 men who were brothers, narrowed it down to one who lived there the entire time. He was a scant mile to a mile and a half from the family and from where it happened. His whole life he was there, just living.
And he lived a whole life, too.
He did. Married, kids, grandkids, church goer, truck driver, whatever. I can't right now. But Othram Labs is a beautiful thing, and it's not alone. If you follow any sort of true crime cases and are into genetic genealogy, you have no doubt heard of Parabon Labs. You've heard of C.C. Moore, people who are doing amazing work. And the quote I said at the beginning was, if you've left DNA, you're already caught. And that's Dave Mittelman's motto. Mine is, we're coming for you assholes, but I'm more rough around the edges. David Mittelman is a doctor, PhD. I like calling him Dr. David. It makes me feel, better. And he is the most interesting, fascinating, approachable human being because he's working hard to not only help solve cases or work in tandem with law enforcement and other labs to solve cases, but he is trying hard to get the word out there. They work exclusively with law enforcement, and they are just, he says he has a team of 20. When I say that he's a rock star, I find that people that are really good at what they do and are comfortable in their own skin are the first to be humble and to say, oh, no, it's not just me. I have a team here. And I'm sure he's right. He has a team. But he came up with the idea. He could see the future. I'm just going to call him a visionary because that's how I feel about him. He could see the future of, he's a science guy. He, is a smart science guy, and he could see a need and a niche, and he filled it, and in a couple different ways. He had a previous company that was purchased by a larger company and wanted to start this company that would really help law enforcement. And what he says, there are three things that are needed to solve a case to work with a lab like his. You need candidates, which there are unfortunately plenty of people who have done bad things to other people and left a part of themselves there, i.e. DNA. You need law enforcement interest, which is something I'm trying to help with because I am contacting every detective I know. And some of them have absolutely heard of Othram. One detective said, I have them on speed dial. But if they hadn't heard of Othram Labs for some reason, I want them to know that they exist, because if they have a cold case, an old case, an unsolved homicide or rape, something where DNA is important to the case, Othram Labs is kind of magnificent and kind of magical. So they need candidates, which they have. They need law enforcement interest, which I know they have, and they sure will have more of as time goes on. And they need investment. So there are a lot of agencies that get funding from the Department of Justice. I even asked the question in the interview, have you ever had someone do a GoFundMe? And he said they have. They've had, family members who have, gathered the funds, because the testing isn't cheap. It's a lot of hard work. And it's more than testing. It's just more than it's more than someone in a lab with a tube. It's a lot more than that. There's a lot more that goes into it, and it's fascinating. And I hope you will enjoy this interview with Dr. David Mittelman. So we are so excited today to have as our guest David Mittelman from Othram Labs. And I have this quote that sometimes a few parts of your life come crashing together. And it's a W.H. Auden quote that says, "Murder is unique in that it abolishes the party it injures, so that society has to take the place of the victim on his behalf, demand restitution, or grant forgiveness. It's the one crime in which society has a direct interest." And I love that quote. Several reasons. One is because I was absolutely awful in chemistry and biology in college, and the only way I could pad my GPA was with English and literature. So somebody who's not, who's stellar at biology and chemistry is Mr. Mittelman, who, should I call you doctor because you're a PhD?
You can call me doctor, you can call me David, whatever you like.
You're amazing. So I'll call you Dr. David. I like that.
Okay.
So Dr. David is just a complete and utter fascinating badass. And I became familiar with what he does and what he's doing when I was asked to cover a 46-year-old cold case on this podcast from a Texas native who was much more familiar with the case than I was. And I covered the case, and lo and behold, 5 or 6 months after that, we all, got this big hit that, oh my gosh, it's been, a suspect, I started to say it's been solved, but that's a suspect has been arrested. And it was one of those things that I didn't think would happen the way it was going to happen. I think that people who do podcasts hope that someone somewhere will hear it and maybe know a piece of information, maybe a suspect or a perp talked or said something. But the way that Carla's case ended up in your realm was fascinating. And I have like 17,000 questions to ask you, and I promise I won't machine gun you with all of them. But let's start at the beginning. So here's David Mittelman, who is an academic. He goes to college in Texas. He goes to Baylor. You actually end up teaching at the University of Virginia and kind of starting your own. I just wanted to get a little background about you. So you start your own lab or program for genetics?
Yeah, so I got my start at the Human Genome Project. This was actually in the 90s. I was in Dallas at UT Southwestern, and UT Southwestern was one of the believe there was 12 sites at the time that were doing genome sequencing to figure out the DNA letters for the very first human sequence. So before there was any sequence of a human.
Right.
And so I was at Southwestern, and then I trained at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston. That was in human genetics, and worked on other projects that revolved around sequencing. Instead of one person, many people. There's a project called the 1,000 Genomes Project.
Right.
And we ended up sequencing a lot more than 1,000 people. But we learned a lot about human variation and how to measure DNA markers in people. And then, as you noted, I actually left with some other folks that were at Baylor. A number of us moved to Virginia Tech. They started a new institute for bioinformatics and genomics, and wanted to kind of shift to more human-centric problems. So I went to Virginia Tech and started a genomics lab there. I was an associate professor and worked there for a while, and then eventually left academia and jumped into a number of projects, mostly biomedical in nature. Had a brief stint at a consumer genomics company, like one of those companies that sells the tests to tell you about your ancestry based on DNA.
Mm-hmm.
So basically have done DNA testing my whole life in academia and industry, usually, like I said, in kind of biomedical research or clinical testing. And a few years ago, got together with a group of colleagues that I've been working with for decades. And we really wanted to make a difference and apply DNA testing in a new direction. And, at the point that we were making this decision, there's like a diagnostic clinic that'll test your DNA for a clinical marker on every street corner. But at the same time, there's not, where do you go to solve a cold case, right? There's
well,
there's no street corner.
And your colleagues are definitely making a difference.
Yeah, and I want to stress, it's almost 20 of us. And the remarkable thing is that most of us, including the ones that aren't necessarily in the lab, like the guy that does my case management, he was before he was in this industry, he was in medical sales. And so all of us have had roles peripheral to some aspect of DNA, whether it's selling a clinical lab test, whether it's getting involved here, whether it's testing for the research or academic or medical space, or now in forensics. Everyone on our team has had some exposure to the world of DNA testing, and we all wanted to redirect that energy and effort to this problem of essentially growing numbers of cold cases. Well, the National Institute of Justice calls it like the silent mass disaster,
right?
Accumulation of cases. Yeah.
Right. That's a great way to put it. And one of the things I love about what you do, I mean, you're not only a doctor or an entrepreneur, in my mind, a visionary. You are so collaborative. And you understand that, much like any case, whether it is, a hot case at the moment or goes cold over time, it takes a village to do anything, in my mind, in this world. But it definitely takes a village to create what you have done with Othram. It's so fascinating. So we go back a couple of years, and you get funding to start it. Had you always wanted to have it located in Texas?
Well, so I had a company that was acquired by a company. What's that?
Was that Arpeggi? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Arpeggi was a company we built. We did a lot of things there, but one thing we did is we helped kind of drive the standards for how to do clinical sequencing. So how do you know when you're doing testing that you're doing it accurately? So we built a lot of the early benchmarks for that, along with NIST. We did it side by side with the government. And anyways, that company gets sold to a company in Houston. And so although I had trained in Texas, I had then moved to Virginia. The acquisition moved me back to Texas. Mm-hmm. And so I was here already. And don't get me wrong, I love Texas, but I was already here. So
I got you.
When we worked to build the new company, the majority of us were already either in Houston or close to Houston. And so it was a natural choice. Right. Texas is also in the middle of the country, so it makes it very easy for us to get out there and for folks to come to us.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was a little bit of just kind of, we were already in Texas. Why not get started here?
That's smart. So, and there are so many fascinating cases come from Texas, quite honestly. It's a huge state, and there's a lot of interesting cases, new and old, that come from Texas. It's kind of, I never thought about it being kind of centrally located. And I can tell from the research I've done, you guys are everywhere. I mean, you are, collaborating with law enforcement all over. I mean, I'm guessing the United States, but are you also collaborating with any law enforcement in other countries?
Yeah. You may or may not have seen, we announced an assistance we provided to the Toronto Police Service. They just announced the solve for the Christine Jessup murder. So Christine Jessup was a 9-year-old girl who was assaulted and brutally stabbed to death in the early 80s, and they never figured out who was responsible. And they had DNA evidence that remained. It was not great evidence, not in great shape. It was old, and we were able to process a profile that enabled the Toronto Police Service to make an ID. And unfortunately, the perpetrator has died.
Right.
He died in 2015. But in fact, they solved the case.
But at least they solved it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did actually see that just recently, and I feel ignorant. I never think of Canada as another country. I think of it as, it's our cousins to the north. But yeah, you're right. That's another country. I did actually see that case.
Yeah.
So Othram Labs is working everywhere, and I can't wait to talk about cases from the past. But let's talk about the case where I found you, which was the Carla Walker case, and something you said, which is very paramount, something that Othram does that may not be available everywhere, is that you sort of use as a calling card, we take on the tough cases. And I will tell you that I am speaking with a detective that we interviewed a few months ago on a very difficult cold case with an odd DNA issue. And as soon as I found out about you, I messaged him and said, hey, look at this. And he said, oh yeah, we have them on speed dial. They couldn't help us with this case, but I know they'll help us with others. And we have a wonderful contact there. I believe he said her name was Shannon. And so obviously the word is getting out that you are working with law enforcement and the great, response that is coming from what Othram does. So tell me, what's the difference between what Othram does and I understood a little bit. One of the problems I've always had with CODIS is I'm grateful it's there, but unless you've done something wrong and they have your info, they're not going to match you to anything. It's like Othram goes in the opposite direction. If they have your information and you can match it to someone else, then we can find you, as opposed to unless you've been caught, we can't find you. So tell me what Othram does that's different.
So Othram, so right now we're the only laboratory in the United States that essentially has vertically integrated this process. So we call it evidence to answers. So we can take evidence, we can take a DNA extract, and we've got an in-house process to essentially access as much DNA information as we can from that extract or evidence. And once we do that, we use that information to build a genealogical profile. And in the case of Carla Walker, we then produce the identifying information necessary for Fort Worth police to then, advance their investigation towards a suspect whom they later confirmed and arrested. And so there's, I guess what makes us different from CODIS is that in the CODIS scenario, you correctly note you have to be in CODIS, but CODIS is measuring, like 20 markers. And so CODIS is a really good way to confirm identity, even if you're not in the database. If I suspect you're at a crime scene, I could do a one-to-one comparison between the crime scene and you, and I'll know that it's you. In fact, they used these kind of STR markers, as they call them, to confirm the true identity of Carla Walker's killer at the end of the project. CODIS is great. These markers are great for confirming identity. They're just not good at finding people, because with 20 markers, there's not a lot you can do. If you were my sister and we looked at 20 markers, we might only share half of those markers in common.
Right.
And if you were my cousin, we may not share any. And so the sensitivity of detecting a relationship with 20 markers isn't great. And that's the problem. Now, that's not a flaw. It's just that CODIS was not designed to go find people. As you said, CODIS was designed to essentially track repeat crime by indexing folks that are convicted of a crime and then going back to get them. But not surprisingly, if you look at like unidentified remains, like what you'll find in NamUs, the success rate of using CODIS to identify someone is, an unidentified remain is 1%. I mean, it's very low.
Right.
And so anyways, what we do is two things. The first thing is we can access information from evidence that simply is inaccessible to other methods. That's number one. We can work with like the worst evidence and still get good information. And number two is we collect tens of thousands to 100,000 markers instead of 20. And all those extra markers allow us to do lots of things, of which one of them is genealogy, to help identify someone that might be a victim or a perpetrator to a crime. That's
one of those amazing explanations that makes sense even to someone like me who's not really good at this kind of thing. But another thing you said that really meant a lot to me in an interview I read is that, what you do doesn't solve cases. It's an investigative lead, and it, won't be enough on its own to solve a case. You still need investigators to put the pieces together. But this is such an exciting part of the puzzle, such an exciting large piece of the puzzle that, wasn't available before, which, 46 years ago, there were so many persons of interest in Carla Walker's case. There were, wondering if someone was a repeat offender, thinking it was her boyfriend, thinking it was family members, thinking it was someone she went to school with. And here it was someone she'd never met. It was the most frightening of crimes, and that it's a stranger abduction right out of her car, out of her boyfriend's car. I mean, it's the kind of thing that we need something like what Othram does to actually end up solving it. And you're so humble with everything you're doing. You're like, look, we can't solve cases, but we can certainly, give you a big flashlight to hold on to something and light it up. And that's how I feel about podcasts too. We don't solve cases, but we can use our platform to shine a light on a case. And boy, what exciting stuff Othram is doing. So you had narrowed it down to, with the genetics, to 3 brothers. And, with the other investigative tools, they narrowed it down to Mr. McCurley, who, lived within a mile of where everything happened his whole life, and apparently was not a repeat offender. And that's the kind of thing where CODIS, he had a couple of like DUIs or something, but nothing where they would have taken his DNA, and nothing where they could have found him. And then here you guys come. It's just an amazing tool. So I know a lot of people have heard of GEDmatch because of the Golden State Killer, but you had mentioned something I hadn't heard. It's called DNAsolves.com. And that's another website where people can, if they've like me, producer Mark got me for Christmas my 23andMe kit a few years ago. And so if you have something like that, you can upload your information to DNA Solves also.
Yeah, there's a couple databases that you can use. DNA Solves is a database that we built. It's for law enforcement only. There's GEDmatch, where you can use it for law enforcement or for genealogy, depending on what you opt in or opt out of.
Gotcha.
There's also Family Tree DNA. Okay. And they have a database. So and their database is, I believe you're opted in, but you can choose to opt out if you do not want to participate. So there's 3 different databases. There's 3 different models for how you can consent. But the bottom line is, as a genealogist, your goal is to get the most number of genetic matches across all available resources. And then your hope is that those matches will help you essentially tether an unknown person to a tree. Right. And then you can use that to reverse engineer their identity. So
that's it. That's what's so fascinating. It is reverse engineering. It's fascinating. If you have a tree, right? If you have a family tree and you have known relationships that you can establish through birth and death records and marriage records, right? Then if you have a tree and then you have an unknown person and you know their exact genetic distance to other people, right? So you know that they can only be these types of relationships away from these people. Then if you know where the matches belong on the tree, and you know that because you know who they are,
then there's only a certain number of places you can fit an unknown person, right? And so through process of elimination and by having enough matches to kind of overlay, you'll eventually narrow in on the location on a tree that someone could sit while still being consistent with the genetic distance to all the matches.
Right.
It sounds kind of technical, but really you're just basically tethering an unknown person to a tree by relating them to people that you know are on the tree and you know where they are on the tree.
It's different limbs and different leaves. And yeah, I can picture. I'm not very visual. I'm much more auditory. But the way you described it was great because I can actually picture it in a tree form.
And that's by the way why I like to be very clear on what our role is, because there's and he touched on it, but there's basically 3 steps in the process. The first step is to basically eliminate possibilities and end up with candidates. These are not the suspects or the victims. They're candidates to these roles. And the reason I say candidates is that genealogy doesn't always give you a name. Genealogy might give you a family. So in our case, in the specific case of Carla Walker, you have 2 individuals that had children, and there was 3 males that descended from those 2 individuals. And so genealogy is not telling you more than that. You're not going to distinguish one brother from another using genealogy. So what you have is, I like to call it candidates. That's phase 1. In phase 2, law enforcement uses other information. You know, maybe one of the brothers wasn't alive at the time. Maybe one of the brothers was out of the country. So using non-genetic tools unrelated to Othram at all, they do their investigative work, and now they take the candidates, and one of those candidates might become an actual suspect. Then once they get that done, the third step is, of course, doing the investigation, which rarely rests only on DNA. There's other evidence. You know, there was a gun that, matched the magazine clip found at the scene. You talk to other people involved. So by the time you've solved the cases, you've taken candidate information that's produced with the genealogy profile Othram takes. You've done the work to confirm an actual suspect, and that can be done through conventional STR testing or other means. And then you've actually done a complete investigation to show that you have reasonable cause to think this person is involved in the crime as either the perpetrator or the victim. So it's a 3-step process, and we're really just involved in step 1. It's very important that the people that confirm our work are a different people at a different lab using a different technology.
Right.
And that's what happened for Carla Walker when they swabbed the person they suspected of being responsible. They used a different lab, a different test, whole different process, and they get the same answer. And that's what's so impactful. You have an investigation where he's, a person of interest. You've got work from Othram that makes him a candidate person to consider. You've got conventional forensic STR testing, which is excellent at confirming identity. You put all that together, and now it's very hard to think of another possibility. And at that point, they go to speak to him, and with all that information in hand integrated, and it's like you said, it really is you could call it an investigative village, that basically puts lots of work together, including, not to mention, the work of decades of detectives and other folks.
Absolutely.
And they go to talk to him, and I don't know the details, but my understanding is they had a chat, and he eventually confessed.
Mm-hmm.
And so and then he was arrested. So that's the real story. And what we do is we specialize. I like to tell people we specialize in digitizing evidence, because here's the thing: the DNA work and the genealogy and the investigation, the genealogy and the investigation requires good quality data. If you don't have a good profile or you have no profile, you're out of luck. And so our focus is to make sure that we basically best digitize the evidence from the crime scene so that they have the best chance of making an ID. It's really not any different than, for example, if you have old cassette tapes or vinyls, right? They wear out over time. The music doesn't sound as good anymore. So you can take those and digitize them into MP3 format, right? And now you've immortalized that music on your computer. Same deal here. We're taking evidence that's going to degrade, get consumed, become unusable over time. It might already be unusable by most methods.
Right.
We take it and we digitize it and convert it to like a forensic MP3, and now it's on the computer. And all of a sudden, the possibilities are limitless. Genealogy, one-to-one testing with, maybe it's an unknown person and there's family that says, I think I'm related. Well, now you can do one-to-one comparisons and target testing. Lots of things become possible when you got good data. So when we started the company, and this goes back to your other question about like what makes us different, instead of trying to take existing technology and kind of keep tweaking it towards the future, we got on the drawing board, figuratively and literally, and we were like, what would forensic testing look like in the future? Like, put CODIS aside, put everything we're doing aside now. Let's say we're inventing forensic testing for the first time ever using 2020 technology. And so we dreamed up what forensic testing would look like in the future. And then we just basically built it. We built it and brought it to now. And now we're trying to drag the rest of the investigation to that future.
Right. You are a visionary, that's for sure. Even everything I've read and listened in other interviews, I'm like, this guy has a vision and he is singularly focused, and it is working out beautifully for all of us.
That's the other thing, is we don't do anything but human ID for law enforcement.
Right.
We don't do medical testing. We don't do research. I mean, we built a laboratory that is probably overfit and overspecialized for one thing only. But when you only do one thing, you can really focus on doing it really great.
Beautifully, yeah.
And not everything in the world can be done by just incremental tweaking. Like, sometimes you just got to scrap it and build from scratch the best possible thing. And so that's really what our inspiration was. And I am on a mission, as my entire team is. And our goal is to basically positively impact, even in the smallest way, as many cases as we can. And, the Carla Walker case is a great story in which we helped Fort Worth Police Department. But I just want you to know that we've also worked on other cases. Just announced actually this morning, Bodie, which is one of the largest private crime labs in the country, they teamed up with some folks, the Porchlight Project and police from Ohio, and they just cracked an amazing case. For apparently a school teacher that died in 1881. I think it's the oldest case ever solved using this method. It's just wild. And we played a super tiny part. We did the sequencing. We built that profile using our laboratory method. They did all the genealogy. They did everything. I didn't even know about the case until it was announced. But the point is, we make our technology available to other laboratories, to other groups, so that they can also go solve cases. And our goal is just to make sure the most cases get impacted in a positive way. Even if we do a little piece or all of it, we'll do whatever they want. We're always happy to help in as much or as little as a person we're working with wants us to help. Yeah,
that's one of the things that I admire most is your vision of collaboration. I mean, when I said you are a flashlight, I feel like you're a flashlight and a map. So you're a flashlight and then you're a map, and you're like, here's the map and here's a couple of places you may want to check. And then law enforcement takes it from there and connects the pieces that you have given them and makes either a bigger map or a bigger puzzle. I'm just going to come up with all sorts of analogies for what you do. But it is amazing,
I'm writing these analogies down for future interviews.
You can use map, flashlight, all of the things, all the things I'm saying. I'm giving you, dropping these pearls.
Microscope.
Thank you.
Yeah, microscope. I'm sure I bet he's thought of that one.
What you said about a case being settled from the 19th century, it fascinates me because it indicates to me that this is such a new broad method of investigation that maybe some very old cases, some historical cases that are unsolved might be looked into.
Well, producer Mark, one of the ones I'll just tell you this, Dr. David, Mark only knows a very surface amount of what we talk about because he likes to put himself in the seat of the listener. So he asks questions that maybe I know an answer to, but that a listener may not know an answer to. And you just brought up the best point. I wanted to talk to Dr. David about the Joseph Henry Loveless case that I thought was so fascinating. So, producer Mark, this kind of, I'm going to call him a scallywag, which sounds like a pretty good term for someone.
Was he a rapscallion?
He was a rapscallion from Clark County, Idaho. And what would it have been, like the late 1800s, I guess, maybe? And I guess he was born in the late 1800s. And he's, let's just call him what he really is instead of pussyfooting around. He was an asshole, and he killed his wife, and he dismembered her. And then, it's the Old West, so he goes on the run. I guess it was 1916. He was kind of a little bit of a Houdini in that he could escape prison, and he did quite often. He usually carried like a saw in his boot. I'm not sure, why it wasn't confiscated, but he was on the run for killing his wife, and he ends up I guess in a cave in eastern Idaho. His torso is found in 1979 by this family that's searching for arrowheads. His torso is found in a burlap bag. And 12 years later, there's like a hand and an arm, both legs wrapped up in the same kind of burlap. And they, are trying to, I started to say piece them together, and that sounds but piece them together. And he's in the DNA Doe project. And then Othram Lab, what was it, 2019? You extract genetic material from one of his leg bones. And Dr. David, was it preserved because it was in clothing? Is that what made it, a little easier for you to find what you found?
I'm not sure. I mean, I was so just to clarify, there was a laboratory that had done the extraction of DNA from that material. What was sent to Othram was a DNA extract. Sometimes people will send us bone and we'll do bone. Sometimes they'll send us an extract that they've developed from bone and we just run the extract. But, and I thought about that case. I was like, how incredible, right? That you can get DNA from someone that's almost 100 years old, 1916. Mm-hmm. But like I just said, now there's one from 1881 and we got a good profile from that. So I think we have really sensitive methods. We can work with DNA that's substantially degraded, and that's what happens to DNA when it's old. Whether the properties of the cave help preserve the person, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I mean, we just solved another one in 1881. So there's just a whole,
a whole new world,
whole slew of cases. Yeah, and here's the cool thing about it, right? Like this case you mentioned with Loveless is a 1916 case. Like you said, it was a DNA Doe project case. And that's a great organization that works on basically just identifying unknown folks.
Absolutely.
And they leveraged Othram lab testing to collect the data they needed to make the identity. They used their genealogist to do that. All we did was the lab work. And then you have, Bodie just did the same thing with their genealogists. And all they did was leverage the Othram laboratory process to, again, generate data points. So I think this goes back to my earlier point, is that if you can get really good data, and when I say that, I mean DNA markers from DNA evidence, and this is like tens of thousands, 100,000 markers. If you can get good data, then the possibilities are limitless. And so our focus is to basically make sure that anybody that wants access to information from these older pieces of evidence can get it. And we've since become real experts at bone work. This is trailing off from kind of the topic we originally discussed, but since you took us into the olden days, I will tell you a lot of these skeletal remains, they fail testing because in addition to being degraded, they're contaminated with bacteria and other non-human stuff.
Right.
And when you try to perform conventional testing on them, or even some of these advanced methods, they don't work. And so we've developed, this is another thing that makes us unique, is we have a really, really, really cool way to get information from even the most terrible looking, contaminated, degraded, just worst of bones. And just to be super brief, I'll just tell you a fast story. There's a guy, his name is Rodney Johnson. He was a homicide victim in Snohomish County in Washington State. And the lead detective there was Jim Scharf. And he was killed in the late 80s. And apparently thrown into a lake where he was weighed down, and his body surfaced up in the mid 90s.
Wow.
And fishermen found his body, but it had been underwater for like 6 or 7 years. So like our friend in the cave, it's not really the best place to store DNA.
Right.
And so then he spends another 25 years or so at the ME's office, skeletalized and unidentified. And these bones, you can imagine, I don't have to tell you the secret, like they were in bad shape.
Right.
And so one of our friends at another laboratory, we work with them a lot, they did a DNA extraction, but there was basically very little DNA. And we ended up, after removing the contaminants and everything else, we ended up taking, I kid you not, 20 cells worth of human DNA from this gentleman, and we're able to build a profile just like we did for all the other cases you mentioned. And we passed that information, like we always do, back to Jim Scharf, and he and his team were able to, amazingly enough, connect him back to a living father and a living brother, and figured out who he is. And by the way, he's a homicide victim, so figuring out who he is allows him to work the case. It's very hard to get justice for someone you don't know.
Right.
So time and time again, we can take, whether it's someone from 1916 or someone from 1881, or whether it's heavily contaminated or degraded or low quantity DNA, whether it's challenging for who knows why. I mean, the DNA in the Carla Walker case has been tested before and just not successfully.
Right.
Whatever the reason is, we can take these challenging projects and then go tackle them. And if we can build a good profile, the story's always the same. Whether it's, one group or another, someone's going to put the pieces together and get an ID. And I just think that's the most, exciting and encouraging story ever, because
it is.
Imagine how many cases have evidence right now that could probably
just
be
waiting for you. Yeah, just waiting for you. Yeah, and producer Mark, the Joseph Loveless case. So after the work that Othram did and the other labs, and they got the extract, they narrowed it down to an 87-year-old man in California who was Loveless's grandson and had no idea his grandfather killed his grandmother.
Wow.
I mean, that's
really something.
Yeah, and the case you're talking about, I think you said his name was Mr. Anderson.
Rodney Johnson?
Or Johnson, yeah. I mean, that's, to find his father and brother, and they may not have known what happened to him, and now we know he, probably didn't tie a concrete block to his own leg. When
they found the skull, it had 2 bullet holes in the back.
Then that's pretty good. That's pretty good indicator.
He's definitely a homicide victim. But you know what? His family didn't know. And,
right.
The guy vanished. And they ended up filing a police report, a missing persons report. But you know how it is. You don't file a missing report the day the person goes missing all the time. Sometimes you think he maybe took off. And so sometimes you need a little bit more information, and you can unlock that information in DNA evidence. And that little extra piece of information, kind of gets you over that speed bump, over that barrier of getting to a complete story. And again, it's the same story, whether it's looking for someone that has died either through being a victim or maybe by accident. Maybe it's not even a crime, they just died. But everyone deserves to be reconnected to family. And so that's, if we can help, there we will. And you said earlier in the program, like, we like to work the hardest cases. I mean, there's 250,000 cases, as I understand, estimated in this country. And so there's enough cases to keep everyone busy for multiple lifetimes.
Right.
We try to focus on cases that have just kind of lost traction, because I guess I don't want to leave a cold case behind. And when you read about Bodie, working with law enforcement to solve an 1881 case, it makes me feel like, if you can do that, there's probably other cases that are more recent that can be accessed. Well, I don't want to leave them be. The Carla Walker case could have very well just gone cold.
Absolutely.
And, so I love taking cases that others don't want to work on. That way I'm not competing really. And also I'm bringing a unique value. I mean, these cases were overlooked and they're going to be ignored anyway. I might as well give it a shot. And we don't always help.
Love a challenge. Obviously you love a challenge. I mean, that's and not always, like I said, the detective that I mentioned the lab to said, oh yeah, we know about them and they're great. They can't help us with this case, but we know they'll help us with others, and we are so happy to have a connection. And what? So what?
I know it's going to sound weird, but we're actually pretty conservative, and so we have some really good ways to predict up front if we're going to be able to help. We've done enough of this now to where we can profile evidence, and we'll know, like, early on, before you burn evidence and waste a bunch of money, we'll know if it's going to work, and it allows us to keep our success rate, reasonably high. And not waste the money and time of investigators.
Yeah,
and
not waste their time or yours.
Yeah, we're very, very, very upfront with people, and we turn a lot of casework away. If it's not the right time, my personal opinion is stick it in the freezer and wait. You know, technology constantly improves.
It's going to catch up.
But if we can bring the value, like, we're happy to tackle the hardest case if we have, reasonable evidence to suggest that we can be helpful.
Have you ever had a law enforcement agency not understand what you do or not want to participate?
I think what we do is pretty straightforward for law enforcement. They understand. The biggest challenge in getting law enforcement, law enforcement we meet, they're all very excited about the method. The issue is that, they're at the mercy of funding that they get, right, from the DOJ, from other sources. And this technology is very new. So I think that as there's continued leadership and kind of direction from the federal, up on top side, then I think it'll make it easier to deploy the technology. I mean, in the future, you'll have grant offerings to law enforcement that specifically say, for any case that has failed CODIS and hasn't worked, here's funding earmarked specifically for this purpose. But funding and budgets are determined in advance, usually a year in advance.
Right.
And this technology is new. So I think the question is less of like, do they want to do it or not? They all want to do it. Every law enforcement officer wants to solve a case. The question is, do they have the funding and can they get approval? And that's not a straightforward thing to solve, even after you've showed the success of the tool. It just takes time for this to penetrate all the levels of government and make it into a grant offering.
So you mentioned the funding, which is very fascinating to me. And I'd read a little bit about the DOJ and what you're talking about. And I love the idea of grants. Have you ever had a case where someone maybe started a GoFundMe account and gathered the money for the testing?
We have. So actually, if you go to DNAsolves.com, we have on the landing page a handful of cases. I mean, I would say virtually all of our cases are just funded through law enforcement, but we do have these like odd cases here and there occasionally where law enforcement is willing to work with us to work the case, but there's no mechanism to fund the case. It could be for a variety of reasons. And we post those up there and we'll crowdfund them. And there are some of these cases that are of enough public interest to where people will, chip in a few bucks here and there. And sometimes we have donors that we work with that love, contributing to causes. Sometimes it's another, there's lots of different ways that we can get these cases funded. But I hate to see a case languish only because of a financial situation. So we don't do it a lot, but we do crowdfund sometimes cases. And you can kind of see, if you go check out our website, you can kind of see the cases right now that are at various stages of either funded or in the process to being funded.
I love it. I think that's so inventive too, being open. It just shows even more of your collaborative spirit. Not only are you collaborative in your work and how you get things done, but in your collaborative and how it can be funded to get done. That's terrific. So tell me about Forensic Genomics magazine, and can like a layperson subscribe? Because it sounds fascinating and I kind of can't wait.
So it's a scientific journal and anyone can read it. It may be boring, so you may need a little bit of extra coffee. Mm-hmm. We were at a conference, our first conference at ISHI. At our booth, we had espresso cups and coffee just to help everyone. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but science is exciting, but it can be a lot to take in.
Maybe not for everyone. Yeah, right. I got you.
Yeah. So, but forensic genomics. So here's the thing. I was talking to you about how all this is new, and we're waiting for kind of broader penetration of the market. That's why I do these interviews, because anytime we can have a chance to talk about this, somebody's going to hear about it and they'll emotionally connect on some level to a case they have or something they know about, and it helps to get the word out.
Just one reason we love you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. The other reason that is that is taking time is that as I told you, there are many methods available, and not all lab testing methods are the same. And people talk a lot about the genealogy and about the investigative side, but the problem is the DNA testing side, if it's not done right, if there's no data, there's no investigation. And so I think it's important anytime there's a new field, a new technique, there has to be kind of validation and discussion and kind of public research and development. So in the spirit of doing that, this is what we did in my previous venture when we were in the medical space, and this was back when DNA sequencing was just beginning to make its kind of its debut in clinical testing. At the time, people were wondering, like, could you ever use this advanced DNA testing for medical testing? And it wasn't a for sure until they developed standards and benchmarks and like the CNET benchmark of which computer is faster. Like, does this testing actually work? Does it identify things it's supposed to identify? So that needs to happen for these methods. You need to compare how well different methods work, what evidence works, doesn't work. I told you bones are especially challenging. And so the Forensic Genomics Journal is published by Marianne Liebert, and she's one of the larger publishers of scientific literature and has had a personal interest in pushing DNA research. That's why I like that publisher.
Right.
They actually wanted to start this journal to essentially catalog academic research in this space. Again, for all the reasons I mentioned, to help standardize, bring together information that can help drive the field forward, scientific studies and such.
So it'll be a quarterly magazine, starting next year?
It's a quarterly publication of academic and industry research. They asked me to be the editor-in-chief, and obviously I was thrilled because it fits very well with my dream of getting the word out there. So and getting this technique used on all cases, not just like our favorite 5 cases.
Right.
And so I joined on, and the way we've structured the journal is we're looking for original research from researchers that study the laboratory side, but also the genealogy side, also the computer programming side, and even other aspects. I have a good friend. His name is Bill Thomas. He's an advocate for these cold cases. His sister was a victim in the Colonial Parkway murders.
Right.
And I asked him. I was grateful that he was willing to contribute a perspective in our preview issue, kind of his perspective on like why this testing matters, because you can imagine in the confines of a vacuum of academic science, or as they say, in the ivory tower of academic science. You can build anything and you can develop R&D in any direction. And I think it helps to hear from real stakeholders and law enforcement, families of victims. It helps to hear, what really is bugging them, what they're concerned about, because it helps you kind of assess the priority of what you should be doing in these academic research centers.
Yeah, you mentioned in your interview you say, but we need to hear from victims' families and victims. You need to hear the personal side of it too.
Yeah, I mean, scientific research is very important, but scientific research untethered and just into theoretical space, it's not necessarily the most efficient way to bring change in the world. And so I love being able to complement scientific research with the experiences and the firsthand pain points exhibited by those that are going to use the technology. And whether that's the families of victims that benefit or the law enforcement officers that have to deal with the information coming out, I think that's so important. And so that's the point of the journal. It's going to chronicle all this work, and I hope that it grows. We were able to get stakeholders to help lead the journal from all the major companies, from universities. It's super exciting. I mean, it's like the ultimate collaborative project in the space. Pretty much all the major players are involved one way or the other. And I love it. And so we'll see what happens. The first issue drops in March. Yeah. We had a preview issue, but like the first real issue drops in March. And I don't know if any academic folks listen to this podcast, but if they do, please send in your research. We'd love to see it.
They do. I'll tell you, we had some guests who are forensic pathologists who are stellar human beings. And they have they have a podcast called Dead Men Do Tell Tales. And so, I mean, I will absolutely tell them about this too, if they don't already know, because they listen to this podcast too. But we love them. And those sort of, science people are, while I may not understand everything you do, I am just so grateful for what you do and madly in love with, your big, beautiful brains, beautiful brains.
I think everybody should get involved.
I do too. Yeah.
Whether you're doing a podcast as you're doing, whether you're a web sleuther, there's a community called Web Sleuths. Yeah, I love that community. Absolutely. Lots of people collaboratively working to find folks that can be eliminated or included. Whether you're a lab person, like most of my people, whether you're a genealogist, a computer programmer, whatever there's so many ways, right? Because you can build technology directly to pull information from evidence. You can research and help use that evidence to extract interesting solutions to cases. You can tell the stories, which I got to tell you, we had an interesting case as a quick side note. We had a case that law enforcement was going to send to us. They announced that they're sending it to us and explain the case. And I kid you not, 2 days later, family recognized the details in the case, stepped forward, and they solved the case.
Holy cow.
Othram did nothing. We did nothing. They
But
just announced it.
You did. You didn't, but you did. I feel like everything is energy, and the fact that you were going to be involved and law enforcement was going to work with you, that energy's out in the air, obviously. And some family member tuned into the right station, figured out what was going on, and came forward before you even had to do. I mean, you're still involved.
Yeah, you can't underestimate the value of promoting, discussing, and just keeping alive these cases. One thing I'll tell you about the Carla Walker case is that, her brother has been on a 40+ year campaign.
Yeah, he joined the police department to try and solve her case, and then realized his vision was going. And I mean, he's a hero. Yeah. He is a hero.
I mean, that's how these cases get solved. So I think that's why I'm saying this is an exciting time. Because of this new technology, we can examine cases that have just been, just essentially lost or stuck. We can examine any case now, and you literally can be from any kind of part of, any part of life or skill set or whatever. There's a way for you to get involved. There's so many ways to get involved, even in just amplifying the message of what's possible, of specific details to cases. There's so many ways to get involved, and I think again, with 250,000 cases to knock out.
There's enough for everybody.
Maybe a village is an underestimate.
Yeah.
We need
this is Mark. It just seems like Melissa has been talking since the very beginning of this podcast about community and about how you have, as she said, it takes a village to do this stuff. It seems to me, hearing all of this, that there really is a convergence going on. That there is a very vast community. It's kind of a coalescence of, and kind of a convergence of the technology. It's all happening at the same time.
The human experience,
the technology, and
digital. I mean,
it's all coming together so that people from different walks of life, scientists like you, David, passionate people like Melissa who want to go out and really care about the victims and their families, and want to really have a curiosity and an interest in how things get done. They can all come together now. It can happen. It can happen so that we can all have a common language when it boils down to it, to try to solve these cases. This is very exciting.
That's a great way to put it, Producer Mark. I have to say, I have to go back to that W.H. Auden quote in the last sentences. It's the one crime in which society has a direct interest, and it's keeping people off the street who do this, or getting them off the street if they're still there. Besides the fact that Othram is involved in, and a lot of amazing labs are involved in so much, whether it's, genetic genealogy to find out who your fourth cousin is, or, who killed someone 46 years ago, but has lived under the radar. It's amazing, all of this work that's coming together. And it's definitely murder is the one crime in which society has a direct interest. You want to get that person off the street. And we're really grateful that you took so much of your time today. Dr. David, you're a shining star, and we're really grateful that you took time to talk to us.
Well, I appreciate you having me, and I'm excited. I would say, as a parting note, what's happening with Carla Walker in this case from 1881, and in Christine Jessup, this is not good luck or kind of a good fortune. This is a glimpse at the future.
Yes.
And in the future, the cases won't go cold at all, because if there's DNA evidence, you'll sort things out promptly. And so I think that's exciting. I think we're looking at the cusp of the future of how forensics will work going forward.
You are an amazing part of the future and the present. So thank you so much, Dr. David Mittelman, for being with us today. We are really grateful.
Thanks for having me.
So we had waited this week to record the intro and outro to the interview with Dr. David. We were waiting on an announcement. Othram Labs was integral and part of the village that solves these cases. This week it was announced that they had a hand in solving the Siobhan McGuinness case. And Siobhan McGuinness was 5 years old. And her rapist murderer is already deceased. But the fact that we know who it was, who did it, and if there were others that he committed, other crimes he committed, we'll know that too. Here's how you know that Dr. David is not just a scientist and a doctor, but a human being with a huge heart. Before telling me about the announcement that was going to be made, he wanted to prepare me. And he said, "This is a tough one, and he is a monster." And then he sent me the information on the case. This is a man who cares, who talk about investment. He is invested in helping to solve these cases in any way, shape, and form. And I am always shocked that there is a statute of limitations on rape cases. And I hope someday that will be rectified so that a rape case, there is no statute of limitations, much like a murder, because you murder a part of someone's soul when you rape them, when you take from them so much. You take their innocence is just one part of what you take. But Dr. David is such an ethical, humble human being and so passionate about getting the word out there that some of these cases that have been languishing on shelves and in cold storage can actually be solved. He is a stellar human being, and we're really grateful that he took his time to talk to us today. And more cowbell.
If you'd like to support this podcast, go to patreon.com/just the Tip-Sters.